This is the first in a three-part series, and the first episode in our latest season covering unsolved homicides in the United States. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are solely the interviewee's own. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. There's discussion of crime scenes, violence toward children, autopsy, murder, drug and alcohol dependency, and intimate partner violence in this series. For resources, please reach out to 800-799-SAFE or 7233 or thehotline.org. This is the Fallline. Opelika, Alabama is a town that sits in the east central portion of the state, and it's home, at least according to the latest census, to roughly 30,000 people. Once, Opelika was principally a rail and mill town, focused on cotton. And today, the official website highlights the strong school systems, the Victorian gardens and holiday events, and an industry focus more on technology and manufacturing. We've been familiar with Opelika for a long time, and not just because it's 100 miles from Atlanta. The town name became associated with a Jane Doe case that went unsolved for 15 years. The Opelika Jane Doe, now identified as Amora Wiggins, was a case that we watched for a long time, hoping to see a break. In fact, we reached out at one point to ask about featuring her on the Fallline as an unidentified person, but we later discovered that FIGG was already underway. According to the city's official website, in January 2012, Opelika police were called to a mobile home park on Hearst Street. As the website describes it, quote, a skull was located in the yard of a residence, while the majority of the bones were located only a few feet into the woodline behind a trailer and the adjacent lot. Searchers also recovered, quote, a pink child's shirt and a small bundle of curly hair. Testing at the FBI's lab pointed to a young black girl, no older than 7 and perhaps as young as 4. With no name to give her, the community settled on baby Jane Doe. What the autopsy revealed was deeply troubling. Across her small body were, quote, more than 15 individual fractures that were attributed to blunt force trauma. Each one had already begun to heal, which meant the harm had come well before she died. She may have gone hungry, and a break to her eye socket had likely cost her sight in one eye. The ruling in her death was homicide. She'd remain unidentified for over a decade, largely because early attempts to pull a usable DNA profile came up short. Per the town's website, it was in 2022 that newer methods finally worked. Othram Forensics extracted DNA from her scalp and Estrella Labs from her hair. And then Dr. Barbara Ray Venter of Firebird Forensics Group used that profile to trace the child's relatives and to develop leads. That genetic trail ultimately restored her name, Amora Javea Wiggins. Her father was soon charged with felony murder, and his wife for failing to report her absence. And outside of family, it would have been difficult for anyone else to have reported her as missing, or even to have identified her. Based on what was later uncovered, Amora was never enrolled in school. She was 5 years old when she died. Her identification and the eventual conviction of her guardians was big news among those who follow cold cases. But there's another Opelika resident whose case has been waiting too. In fact, it's been cold for decades. She's barely been mentioned in the news. When we went looking for media, we found only a few stories from 2020, and that came down to her daughter's efforts to attract the attention of local journalists. Despite 3 decades passing since her homicide, a digital footprint for the case, it's practically non-existent. That doesn't come down to Opelika, though. Not on the investigative side anyway. Although 38-year-old Sylvia Lou Dowdell was born and raised in that town, and she was laid to rest there too, she died 30 minutes in a county away, in Tuskegee. That's a city that we expect you've heard of. It's best known as the home of the Tuskegee Airmen and of Tuskegee University, which was founded by Booker T. Washington and home to the research of George Washington Carver. It was also the site of the notorious Tuskegee syphilis study. And nowadays, the city describes itself as a place of education and distinction, ranking, quote, 5th of the top cities in Alabama, having the highest percentage of college graduates. It's also where Sylvia Dowdell resided for a time, though not in the spring of 1998. Sylvia was then 38 years old, a mother of 7, and, that May, living back in her hometown of Opelika, where she'd spent months putting her life back together. She'd gotten housing, and she'd gotten work, and she was pulling double shifts at 2 different businesses so she'd have enough money to support her kids. Though some of her children were staying with her sister at the time, there were plans to reunite, some of the family at least. Her 2 oldest sons were in their late teens, and they'd already been living on their own. And the father of her 2 youngest children lived about 30 minutes away, in Tuskegee, in a house that they'd once shared. The children that he'd had with Sylvia were living with him that spring. It was not by Sylvia's choice, and she was desperate to see them. She was not, by all accounts, a woman who would simply vanish. But by the time she was found in Tuskegee, nearly 30 miles from her little home in Opelika, she'd been missing for roughly a week. Her family tells us that they'd been unable to file a formal missing persons report with law enforcement. It was the morning after Mother's Day, May 11th, 1998, that Sylvia's body was discovered at County Road 22 in Macon County. It's a rural stretch where a bridge crosses over water and marsh and a popular spot for fishermen. And according to Sylvia's family, it was fishermen who first saw her there. One of the men, standing at a distance, mistook her body floating in the water for a doll. When they came closer, though, they were confronted with the terrible truth. They contacted local police, and then a county investigator called the state medical examiner out to the scene, and he arrived in the mid-afternoon, a little after 3. 2 conservation enforcement officers lowered a boat into the marsh and carried her body to shore. The scene was photographed and filmed, and investigators gathered several items they found near her, including what was described as black garbage bags. Based on examination, Sylvia had been shot multiple times. Her sister, who was caring for Sylvia's children at the time of her disappearance and her death, had to go to Macon County to identify Sylvia's body. And it's Macon County authorities who were tasked with solving that murder. Speaking of that investigation, we were able to access quite a bit of information regarding the crime itself. But we'll talk about that later, when we get into the day that Sylvia was found. For now, we should begin with her family. Her eldest daughter, Precious, who's now a mother herself and an educator, has spent decades advocating for answers from any official willing to listen. And she has a lot to share. She was only 13 when her mother died, but had long been aware of Sylvia's struggles with abandonment and loss and substance issues, and as the victim of domestic violence. When Sylvia passed away, Precious did what she could to find out more and to push for her mother's case to be solved. And though she was only a child, she accomplished quite a lot. And since she's become an adult, she's not letting this go. Not until her mother sees justice. And so, we aim to help her, and we hope that you can help her too. There are a lot of people in Macon County and in Lee County, Alabama, who know something. Precious, she's totally sure of that. Now it's time for them to finally speak. 7 children were left without their mother. And Precious told us that the youngest 2 have grown up with no memories of her at all, or of their maternal family. The impact of Sylvia's death has changed the direction of her children's lives. Murder is a multi-generational trauma that seeps out to affect a family and a community, a town, a county, and on through generations who are left to pick up the pieces. We spoke with 2 of Sylvia Dowdell's children for this series. Precious is, as we said, the eldest daughter and the 3rd child overall. We also interviewed her brother Steve, the 2nd oldest in the family. Though Steve lives out of state now, Precious is still in Alabama. In fact, she now works in Macon County, in the same place where her mother died. Precious first told us about her childhood and her hometown. As we said, she's the 3rd child, but as the oldest girl, she felt a lot of responsibility for her siblings. And she also loved her mother very much. The fact that Sylvia had struggles throughout Precious's life is something that she learned to understand, especially now that she's an adult. Her mother was born in April of 1960 in Opelika to a prominent family, but Precious says that ultimately didn't make Sylvia's life any easier.
We lived in Opelika, and Opelika is a community of, Black and white people. We are a community of people that we don't have a lot in the African American community, but we have enough. And I went back and forth between my grandmother's house and my mom's house a lot of the times. My grandmother, she lived in a pretty good neighborhood. She lived in a pretty good neighborhood, church going family. I come from a church going family, a church going environment.
When Precious speaks about her grandmother, she's referring to Sylvia's adopted mother, known as TK. She was a family friend who took care of Sylvia after her father died and after her biological mother was no longer able to. You'll hear her discuss both.
My mom's dad was this wealthy businessman in Opelika. Well, most of the times in the South, but in Opelika, it was very rare for a Black man to be a prominent Black man, and just have a lot of money, a lot of business. But my granddad, my mom's dad, very powerful, prominent, wealthy Black man in Opelika, Alabama, has land, has taxi cab services, barber shops, juke joints. I'm talking about he is the guy. And there are about 11 to 13 of my mom and her siblings. And my grandma, which is my mom's mom, she's this wealthy lady, but my granddad dies when my mom is 5 of a heart attack. Randomly has his heart attack and he dies. That leaves my grandma Mamie with 11 to 13 kids. Now, a lot of them are grown, but my mother is 5. She has a 1 to 2 year old brother, and she has other, siblings that are not really ready to be without their mother or their father. So my granddad dies of a heart attack. So his wealth I'm just gonna call it what it is squandered. And I think my grandma didn't know enough about business and being in the South and being in Opelika to keep his things afloat. And she had too many kids. So she turns to alcohol. She's drawing all kinds of bad friends and bad men. My mom is abandoned. They said my mom would be basically wandering around with no food, snotty nose, hair not combed. And not that my grandma was intentionally doing this. I think she lost control. She fell into a depression and she was like a raging alcoholic. My mom said her mom was such a bad alcoholic. And my mom's sister has told me these things too, that my grandma, which is their mom, Grandma Mamie, she would be laying out in the streets drunk. Like, just people got to get her up out the streets and take her home. I think losing my granddaddy, her husband, his name was Baby Lockhart, Eddie B. Lockhart. I think that was really detrimental to my grandma. I think it was. And she just couldn't raise those kids. It was a lot of them. And she just turned to alcohol. So my mom is 5. And finally, my grandma's friend, which is Grandma TK, she takes my mom, Grandma TK and her mom take my mom in at 5. And they basically raise my mom. And my mom is still involved with her mom, of course. But she lives primarily with Grandma TK. So they take her in and raise her. They were really good to her. And I think, honestly, that was the best thing that could have happened to my mom. So she took her in, raises her. At 15, though, my mom gets pregnant by the guy that does the grass, the lawn. He's older than her. My grandma TK forces my mom to marry the older guy that basically got her pregnant. Because, back in the day, they're basically like, you got her pregnant, y'all get married, that is no up for discussion. And I think that was the beginning of my mom's, well, it added on. Because, of course, you being 5 and your mom not raising you, that's traumatic. And then it's more trauma if somebody gets you pregnant at 15, then you got to marry them. That's a lot. So I would listen to my mom talk over the years about, her life, and I would just hear the trauma in it.
Sylvia's relationship with her husband didn't work out. And after she'd had 2 sons, Precious told us, she moved on to other relationships. She was a very young woman then, with young children and a thriving social life that centered around church and town events. Those events were one of the few places to meet people who weren't from Opelika, and it's also how she was introduced to Precious's father.
My dad, he's from Wilcox County, a county about 2 hours away from Lee County, where my mom is from. And he met my mom at church. He's a little bit older than my mom. I think about 9, 10 years older than my mom. But he met her at church.
While Precious's dad and Sylvia didn't stay together, they remained friends for the rest of Sylvia's life. And he remained concerned for Sylvia, because, as Precious said, her mother's struggles with drugs and alcohol began around that time. She was overwhelmed, and she was still dealing with the effects of her chaotic childhood.
So that's her life. At 15, she becomes a mother. By 17, she has another kid. By 22, she has me. And, it's just dwindling out of control. She's getting on drugs. She's drinking alcohol. She's running from her traumatic event. Because I think it speaks to my mom's story. It speaks to generational, and not to get spiritual, but to get spiritual. I got to call it what it is, generational demons, domestic violence. To me, that's a spirit. That's an ungodly spirit. That's an unclean spirit. And I think that spirit first initially got my grandmother, Mamie, and I think it trickled down to my mom, and it actually stopped at me. But she was, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, my mom will tell me these stories, about her mom. She turned into like a really, really bad alcoholic. But she was getting ready for work one day, and the guy knocked on the door. He's a previous former boyfriend. He knocks on the door, shoots her in the head. And she lives for 3 years, I think, but she's folded up. I've seen pictures of her folded up in a wheelchair. She's on a feeding tube, and half of her head is gone. Like, you can stick your hand in her face. Like, he killed her. He killed her.
Her biological mother's death weighed on Sylvia, and so did the responsibility of being a very young single mother. By the time Precious was a few years old, Sylvia had another baby, a daughter, which meant that she had 4 children in total, and all of the joy and the stress that came with that. It was an incredible amount of pressure. And when Precious was still small, somewhere around 4 or 5, Sylvia was arrested and convicted on charges related to her substance use disorder.
My mom went to prison when I was in, I think, right after Head Start, which would take me into my kindergarten, first grade year. I moved in with my grandma, me and my siblings. That was a very happy but sad time. It was happy because we were more stable with my grandma than we were my mother. My mom spent 2 years in prison. We stayed with my grandma. Happy but sad time. That was in Opelika. But my sister grandma lived in Beauregard, which is like the outskirts of Opelika. So we spent a lot of time at my sister's grandma's house as well. We had the best Christmases ever at my grandma's house. My mom's adopted mom, her name is Grandma TK. That's what we called her. Oh my God, me and my siblings, this is when it was just the 4 of us, though. The others haven't been born yet. We would have the biggest Christmas ever. It was so many happy times. Even though my mom was in prison, she would call and be on the phone, and we would be so happy. And our Thanksgiving dinners, we had the best food, the most food. It was the best. I remember the most Christmas and going to church. Grandma always took us to church all the time. Bible study probably on Wednesday, church on Sunday. We went to vacation Bible school. It was just a time of a lot of love. If I could say when did me and my siblings feel the most love, it would probably be when we were living with our adopted grandma.
And lots of structure, it sounds like, too.
It was so much structure. Like, get up out of your bed, make your bed in the morning time. You go to bed at 8 o'clock at night. Your last cup of juice is at 7:45. Yeah, it was a lot of structure, And Sundays, we would go see my mom. We would have a prison visitation, and my dad, my biological dad, would take me and my siblings to see my mom at Julia Tutwiler prison on Sundays. We would go there.
What were those visits like for you?
Woo, they were heavy. They were happy, but they were heavy. Like, I'm still traumatized by those visits even today. I would be so happy to see my mom. We all would. Me and my siblings would be standing there. I can remember the glow on my siblings' face, especially my older brother, Kenny. He would be smiling from ear to ear to see mama. And my other brother, Steve, he would be so happy. Like, this is another level of excitement. But when we got ready, through the whole visit, it would be filled with joy and love and happiness and just talking and laughing. But as the time got nearer for us to leave her and have to go home. The visit is over. See you next Sunday or 2 Sundays later. Oh my God, that's when I would see my brothers. I would see them choke up. Like, they wouldn't cry, but I could definitely see the disappointment in their faces when my mom got ready to, when we had to leave my mom and she had to go back behind the fence. And we all would look back when we was walking to the car. They would allow the prisoners to come to the fence and wave at the families, and I could see my brother. And my sister, she was 2 years younger than me. She would, oh my God, she would cry and scream so bad. She would scream and holler all the way back to Opelika, and it took us about 2 hours or something to get back home. My sister would cry the whole time. It was so bad. It was awful.
The Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women is in central Alabama and over an hour away from Opelika each way. Precious told us that she'd spend much of the car trips to the prison, and even the time during their visits, carefully weighing her siblings and her mother's reactions and their moods.
I don't know. I think it comes with being like the oldest daughter, that mother. I think I held a mother energy for my siblings and my mom. And I think it made me very, very like watchful. Like, I watched everything.
Those trips continued for a few years, a bittersweet but stable time for both missing their mother and appreciating the safety and routine of their adopted grandmother's home. Precious wasn't sure when her mother was to be released, and as it turned out, that news would come as a very big surprise.
I got home from school one day and I will never forget it. Me and my sister came in the house and my grandma TK was like, I got a surprise for y'all. We were so excited, like, okay, what is it? What is it? She was like, we're going to the kitchen and look. So we put our book bag down. We about to topple over each other, running in there to see. And we got in the kitchen and our mother was standing over the stove, stirring a pot of collard greens. And she was looking so pretty. Her hair was pretty. Her skin was pretty. Her teeth was pretty. She had a neat little physique. Nails were painted. She looked so good. And oh my God, me and my sister jumped all over her. Like, it was like we were climbing a mama bear. How bears climb their mama bear. We was hugging, laughing. We was so happy. At this time, my grandma TK has just been diagnosed with breast cancer. So she is really, 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 really sick. Super sick to the point of my mom probably wasn't even there 6 months before Grandma TK was bedbound and she's dying. So my mom is there taking care of my grandma. And we're all happy, and it's a happy time because my mom just came home from prison. But it's also a hard time because my grandmother, the mother that we've known, the couple of years my mom is in prison, she's dying, and she's dying in a room at home. She's not in a nursing home. She's not in a hospital, but she's at home. So we get one mother back, one mother's dying. So it's really hard for me and my siblings, but we're maintaining and we're happy and we're all under the same roof. My grandma didn't live 2 years before she passed, before my mom got out of prison. But in the meantime, of course, my mom is happy, but there's that hurt, that childhood trauma again that you're seeking to validate and fulfill. So you're meeting these boyfriends and guys again, and you meet my brother's dad. It's 4 of us. It's finna be 5 of us because my mom gets pregnant. Not even 6 months, 8 months that she's out of prison, she's pregnant again with my brother Malcolm. And she's pregnant with Malcolm when Grandma TK dies. She's actually pregnant. And that's the boyfriend, but he's married. He's somebody that's just passing through, end up getting her pregnant or whatever. We never see him again. Okay, fine. So Grandma TK dies. We're in the house when she dies. And that same week, my Grandma TK, she has this son. And he comes by and he basically puts all of our stuff out beside the road. Me and my siblings and my mom. My mom is crying. She has to find a place to stay. They give her public housing that's in walking distance of my grandma TK's house. So we went from having enough and being happy and being church going children to living in the projects, public housing, and not even having enough food to eat in the refrigerator. And my mom develops this alcohol, maybe cocaine type of habit. And it's just My grandmother's gone. We don't have anybody. My mom doesn't have anybody. So this opens the door for, different people, bad people to come in and out of my mom's life. Consequently, these people are in me and my siblings' life. And my mom meets her boyfriend, and he's from what you could see, he's a good boyfriend. He's a good provider. He takes care of my mom. We don't have really a need or want for anything as far as like having enough food and having our lights and utilities on. So everything is tumbling down. We're in public housing. My brothers are getting in all kind of mess. They're 16, 17 years old. My mom is losing control over them. So that's making her a worse alcoholic than she's ever been. She's battling with the fact she's just got out of prison.
It was during this period, the family newly in public housing, Sylvia overwhelmed, her oldest boys drifting beyond her control, that she met the man who would remain in her life, on and off, for most of the years that she had left. In the beginning, Precious told us, he came across as a provider. There was food in the house, the bills were paid, and for a while, things felt steadier than they had in some time. Both Precious and her brother Steve called this man their mother's boyfriend and their stepfather, pretty interchangeably. But to their knowledge, the two were never married. We will not be using his name in these episodes, but when you hear them mention Sylvia's boyfriend or their stepfather, they both mean the man that she met and moved in with in Tuskegee. I spoke to Precious a number of times before being introduced to Steve. So when we first spoke on the phone, I asked him to start by telling me a little bit about his mom from his point of view.
I would describe my mom as very energetic, very caring, loving, just a free spirit individual. Everything was strictly about her children. In this instance, when our grandmother died, my mom, she didn't know anything. I mean, it was like reality kicked in. We have to fend for ourselves now.
Steve says he was 17 years old in 1994. That's the year he thinks that his mother might have met her boyfriend. Steve said he'd already moved out, so he didn't have much interaction with the man at first. He was hopeful that Sylvia would be treated well, but some months in, he found out that the new man in his mother's life was abusive.
My mom had this guy, the boyfriend, and I can't say he was decent because I didn't know him. And her boyfriend was an abusive type of guy, loyal to drink, and she drank as well, And he put his hand on my mama, and whatever happened, he jumped on her. Me and my brothers and cousins, we jumped on him, left him for dead, so we thought. He go to the hospital and all that. My mom's still messing with him. He take my mom and move her to Tuskegee, which is Macon County, which is like 45 to 50 minutes away in his town. So they living down there, Precious, my other sister, and my little brother. And at this time, she had just had a baby by her boyfriend, which would be my other little brother, Austin. And by this time, Austin is about 11 months old. I ended up going to prison at 17 years old. So between 17 to 19, that's the last that I knew of my mom.
Steve says that his conviction was unrelated to any physical altercation connected to Sylvia's boyfriend. In fact, it was never discussed again, at least not to Steve's knowledge.
I never heard of me say anything about it. And they kept dealing with each other. Now, see, he didn't deal with me.
As Steve told us, he was incarcerated as a teenager and had a sentence that lasted until 2015. He'd had little news about the trials and the tribulations his family went through. He told us Sylvia had always tried to keep their visits positive, and that she focused on uplifting him. Their eldest brother, he wasn't there, and he'd been out of the house for some time. That made Precious, who was still a preteen, the oldest child in the house. She helped care for her youngest siblings, and that eventually grew to include her baby brother and sister, both the children of her mother's boyfriend. At first, she was just happy to be in a more secure situation. It didn't take long, though, she said, to see the reality of what the relationship was like for her mother.
Somehow we ended up moving in with my stepdad to Tuskegee, Alabama, where my mom was found. 2 to 3 years later, my mom would be found dead under a bridge with her pants halfway down, 4 gunshots to the body, 2 to the head. Living in that house, we moved there from public housing in Opelika. And it felt good because we were getting out of public housing. We were getting out of the projects. We were going into something that was better. It's a nice, pretty house sitting on top of the hill. And, you have these on top of the hill fantasies, the picket white fence fantasy. I felt like that's what we were stepping into.
The peaceful mood of the home did not reflect the instability inside.
I would come home from school a lot of days, and my mom would be in the room asleep. As I got older, I started realizing she was never asleep. She was knocked out. She had been fighting. And how do I know that he had been fighting her? Because the house would be in ramshack, like the plants. My mom loved plants. The big pots would be turned over. Dirt would be everywhere. The kids would be running around with old dirty diapers on. And that's not my mom. She takes care of her kids. If she don't do nothing else, when them kids in the house, she takes care of her kids. And things would be thrown everywhere, and my mom would be in the room with the door shut, like the master bedroom with her door shut. And I just would, just being a kid, you just start cleaning up and changing your brothers and sisters' diapers and just getting the house back together. But you're cleaning up a house where your mom has been beat up. She's beat up, and she had this way where she would try to hide it, but eventually it shows. Like, the more I paid attention to it and the older that I got, and I looked back on it, and I was like, oh yeah, he was being hugged while I was at school. So I would go to school most days, and I wouldn't know whether I was going to come home to my mom being alive or is she going to be dead this time. So sometimes we would run from him, and my mom would have to ask people to pay for us a motel, and my mom would be living in a rundown, filthy motel with, 4 or 5 kids. We would all be in a hotel with my mom and her newborn baby, and the school bus would have to pull up and take me to school. I would have to get on the bus from a motel. And when I got off the school bus, I would have to knock 3 times so my mom would know it was me and not my stepdad coming to beat her up and drag her back home.
Precious told us that her own father, you'll recall that he'd remained friends with Sylvia, he helped them escape several times. But as is common in abusive relationships, Sylvia ended up back at her boyfriend's home. And that meant that the kids did too. Precious was responsible for helping with chores there. And she's actually glad that she was, because doing that work around the house, it gave her insight that she didn't expect.
I would fold up clothes. It was me and my sister's job to fold up clothes. Well, our clothes include our clothes, me and my sister's clothes, that's little siblings' clothes, and my mom's boyfriend's clothes and my mom's clothes. And so my mom's boyfriend had this uniform, this blue, like the Dickie suit with the blue shirt and the blue pants that the guys used to work in back in the day. We would fold up the clothes, but I would be responsible for putting my mom's clothes up and putting his clothes up, because my sister didn't go in my mama's room like I did, because I'm older and I'm more mature. So I'm hanging up his clothing, which is a blue Dickie suit and has his name on the chest. I'm hanging it up, and my mom says, PJ, don't touch that gun in the closet. But of course, I already see the gun. And me, being curious me, I'm hanging up the clothes. I reach back and I see it. It's a long gun. It's not a short handgun. It's a long gun. And of course, I'm like 11 or 12 when this happened. And I touched it and I leaned it towards me. It was a black and brown gun.
That gun stayed on Precious's mind because though it was taken from her mother's boyfriend by law enforcement, it did not take long for him to get it back, and, as Precious alleges, to use it to threaten Sylvia's life. Next time on The Fall Line, we continue the story of Sylvia Dowdell's life and death, and what her daughter Precious discovered. Anyone with information regarding Sylvia's murder is encouraged to contact the Macon County Sheriff's Office at 334-646-0000. 724-0669. Sylvia's family is offering a $5,000 reward in her case. If you know of a case that should be covered on the Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. Our therapy fund is paid for through Patreon and Apple Premium subscriptions. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. That really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so that you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, it's out everywhere now. The Fall Line is created by Laura Norton and Brooke Hargrove. The show is written, hosted, researched, and produced by Laura Norton. Engineered by Southern Gothic Media and Rachel Boyd. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy. And special thanks to Liz Lipka.